Let's have a look at how the newspapers are covering things. I'll start by showing you the Sunday Times. Moving on to the Sunday Telegraph today.
And again it says reunited in sorrow.
For the Sun, all for one, feuding royals in a show of unity.
And the next one, that was the Sun on Sunday. And this is the Sunday People. I think the Fleet Street very much aware that this is going to be, again, people buying these editions of the newspapers as souvenirs, if you like, or certainly keepsakes. Peace for Gran, it says on the front of the Sunday.
Very similar for the Daily Star Sunday, as you can see, and in the Sunday Mirror. There you go. On to the Observer, should we? Let's quickly flick through these then, looking at...
That's the only newspaper that doesn't show the four, the Fab Four. Some of the press are calling them again. I think that's probably a little bit too much, but that is the King taking his solemn oath yesterday. Sunday Express there, again, with the two princes and their respective wives.
Yeah, I was just trying to find... Oh, here we go. Fred says, very disappointed that almost all the front pages are dedicated to the walkabout rather than the swearing-in of King Charles. I suspect the Prince of Wales did not expect this attempt at reconciliation would take precedence over more important events of the day. Yeah, maybe so.
It may be, though, what the people need to see, and maybe that was his judgment. And I think a lot of people will get quite comforted by the fact that at least there's some movement towards reconciliation.
Yes. Yeah, well, let's hope so. Look, let's talk to broadcaster, of course, chef extraordinaire Kevin Woodford and former Conservative advisor Claire Pearsall, who are going to take us through some of the papers this morning. Good to see you. What have you got from the Sunday Mirror, Claire?
Well, I thought it was really, really apparent that the most interesting part of all of this, after we've sort of got over the traditions and everything for the Accession Council, was normal people. And this was a tale of a little girl from Australia, little girl Olivia Akers, 8 years old, who sent Her Majesty a photograph of her with her pony Lady, and she was dressed up as if she was going to be trooping the colour.
Oh, we're seeing it now, it's not.
And side saddle, and the pony was dressed beautifully. And she sent
that picture to the Queen.
She sent that picture to the Queen, and she received a reply on Thursday, which was Friday in Australia, the day the Queen died. This arrived with her, and it was from the lady-in-waiting, Annabel Whitehead, who wrote that Her Majesty was touched to know you two enjoy horse riding. And I think it's stories like that. I mean, that little girl received a letter the day the Queen died that she sent to say, this is what, you have made me want to do this. You have inspired me to go side saddle on my pony. And I just think it's one of the most beautiful things.
Because the letter may have been, as they often are, signed by the lady in waiting, but we know for a fact that the Queen issues the response.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the lady in waiting would have sort of taken the notes, but the Queen would have seen it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that is one of the most beautiful things, especially, it's animals which the Queen was very much in love with, especially horses. And you had the story about the beekeepers earlier.
Beekeepers have to tell the bees.
Have to tell the bees.
Sad news, because bees need to know.
So do horses, and I feel a bit silly admitting this, but on Thursday, before the Queen had died, I was at the stables with my horse, and I did say to her that, we might only have a quick ride because the Queen is not very well, and she looks like she might die. And the horse just sort of stood there and looked at me and didn't mess around and was very, very quiet. And I think animals do understand, and I know people will probably be laughing at that and saying, how ridiculous are you?
I can get that somebody in the royal stables will have probably gone down to the horses and told them.
Absolutely, and I think it was really important to do that. And it's one of those things I feel very, very strongly about. And it was my little link in to sort of the moment. Yeah. And she was very good when I rode, and I got off and then put her to bed, and at that point the news came through that the Queen had died.
Oh.
And it was all sort of, and it's one of those things, as you say, it's a happenstance, and it just sort of brings it closer. And I think everybody has that little personal story, which is why I absolutely adore letters like this from young people, from children, it's their little memento of a time that is very, very sad. But actually, what an amazing thing to happen.
It just shows it's still important to write those letters sometimes, isn't it? You never know what you might get back. Kevin, though, you've been looking at royal quotes, the things that she famously said.
She's fabulous. Let me just give you a few quotes from the Queen. She said to James Callaghan, at that time Premier, and he'd asked her advice on a particular thorny issue, and she said, well, that's what you're paid for. With 9/11, this is an appropriate time to give this quote, obviously. She said, grief is the price we pay for love, which I thought was lovely. She said, I think not favourite, it's the wrong word, but probably the most interesting one was her response to Northern Ireland's then Deputy First Minister, Martin McGuinness, ex-IRA chap, when he asked how she was. And she said, well, I'm still alive, given the situation that happened.
Wow.
And then finally...
What a powerful understatement.
It's so powerful, isn't it? It's simple but powerful. But then my favourite was she was at an event at Trinity College, Oxford, where the Lord Lieutenant of Oxford and his wife both fainted during the meal. And afterwards she said, we've had a wonderful lunch. Bodies all over the place. I love it. I mean, what a wonderful woman.
Well, everybody who knew her says that she did have this. She had a twinkle in the eye. She had a mischievous sense for saying something that possibly only she could say.
Yes.
Although she was the other one fun one, which I must tell you as well. She was in Scotland, and there was a couple of American hikers, bumped into her. And they chatted to her about their holiday plans, and they asked her what she was up to, and she said, well, I live in London, but I've got a little holiday home just the other side of the hill. Amazing, isn't it?
Love it.
It's
But that one to Martin McGuinness.
I know, powerful.
Yeah, when you consider who she lost to the IRA.
but the fact she was prepared to meet him, I think, says a lot, because it's all about reconciliation, isn't it? And it must have been extremely difficult for her.
And about life moving on and things evolving.
Yeah, and then shook hands with him, which was...
which was monumental, really.
It really was.
She was brave.
She was, wasn't she?
I love that, though. These quotes are wonderful.
They're great, aren't
Right,
they?
really
There's
nice.
so many of them, honestly.
Oh, go on. Is there another one?
Well, she said, OK, with Piers Morgan, and we love you, Piers. Piers asked her if she enjoyed hosting garden parties, and she said to him, well, let me put it this way. How would you like 12,000 complete strangers trampling your lawn? Oh, my God.
Oh, love it.
But as an aside on the hikers story, there is a little bit more to it, because the American hikers didn't quite realise who they were speaking to, and actually asked the Queen if she wouldn't mind taking a photograph of them together, and actually said to her, oh, right, have you met the Queen? I believe she lives around here. Yeah, those are the other stories.
They kicked themselves all the way back to the United States.
They didn't find out until they got back to the United States, and they had these photographs, and somebody said, you met the Queen. They hadn't realised until they got home that is what they'd done.
Can you imagine?
How stupid would you feel? Yeah. Oh, how lovely.
I mean, it's just extraordinary. Claire, the Mail on Sunday, pointing out, we knew it already, but we know it's now going to be a week on Monday, and of course we get a day off to mourn our monarch.
We do, and this always divides people as to why we need a bank holiday. Hasn't the world shut down enough? And I absolutely think that we do. I think this is right and proper that people get to spend that time with their families, but also to watch on television, or some people will go and line the route. I mean, people want to take part in a historic occasion like this.
Well, it hasn't happened for 70 years.
Exactly.
And we need to show it due deference.
I absolutely do. And there will always be those who will find fault. And I don't think it comes as any surprise that it would have been a bank holiday.
No.
And that schools will close. But I think that this is time that, especially with children, that you need to have those conversations. You need to talk about life and death and service, and what a beautiful way to do this.
Well, if schools weren't closed, then they would only be in school watching it anyway, wouldn't they? Because what else could you do at a school but have them on, have the TVs on, and
Well, of course,
watch it. You'd have to.
all of the teachers would
No, but
want
you're
to-
right. It's an incredibly educational day for youngsters.
It is.
Isn't it? They're learning, as you said, not just about history and about the constitution of the country we all live in and all of that sort of ceremony and everything, but they're learning about love and loss
Yes.
and families and how you cope and how you get through the day.
Yeah.
And they also get a bit of, sense of the pageantry of it as well.
But it's also
almost the fun, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's things like the stories when you hear the quotes of the Queen and you look at the animals and just her life in service and duty, but also the private side where she did have a cracking sense of humour and everything that goes with it. And I think that's really important for children to know, because we get so hung up on historical facts, but not actually understanding that she had no choice at the age of 21 to take on this role and has dedicated her life to something. And I think that that's a really important message about courage, about service, about deference, but also admitting mistakes, because the royal family hasn't been perfect over the decades, but they seem to
They've
have
kept
learned.
going.
They
Yes.
have, and they've learned
Yeah.
and they've adapted and they've become a fantastic institution, and I hope that will continue. So I think it's a fantastic way to respect our monarch and to welcome in the new King Charles. And there will always be those naysayers that will do it down. So I think
Yes.
we need to celebrate this.
Yeah, I agree, and I know it will be a sad day, but as you say, I'm all for. I do very much believe in celebrating life when it ends.
Yeah.
Celebrate what she did, who she was.
Well, as King Charles said himself in his speech, it was a life well lived. And you have to keep reminding yourself that. She was 96.
Sure.
96 great years is something to celebrate, isn't it?
It is.
Actually, Kevin, we've been talking about coronation marmalade, which we think's a
Oh,
brilliant...
that was Brian.
Yeah.
Well done,
Well done,
Brian.
Brian. Well, Lorraine has joined in and said,
Oh.
how about coronation toast to go with the Elizabeth
Coronation
marmalade?
toast.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, lots of cinnamon in it. Yeah.
And then we could do a really good recipe marmalade.
It'd be interesting, wouldn't it, if you sort of take fruits from around the Commonwealth and I'm going to keep this to myself. I
Yeah,
can
don't
make a
tell
fortune out of
anyone.
this one.
Absolutely, yeah. You go away and do it.
Absolutely.
Have you made marmalade before?
Do you know what? I've never made marmalade.
Well, it's time to start, Kevin.
okay.
It is,
Could
yeah.
be the making of you.
Could be, couldn't it? Yeah.
I see a bright future ahead.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. I do. Interesting, looking at the Sun on Sunday, Kevin. All hail the King.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the Fab Four, and not a great deal about King Charles. Interestingly, history was actually made, wasn't it, yesterday with the accession ceremony, because for 419 years that's been secretive.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, we can see what happens. What an onerous responsibility this man has, and what I feel is that, and it's strange really, because he's lost his mother, and he's lost the woman that he really loves, and normally for us that would be
Enough.
the time to grieve
Yes.
in private, and he doesn't get that. And
No.
he doesn't get it at all. And his speech, I thought, was quite remarkable. His composure, you could see watery eyes,
Yes.
but his composure was excellent. I thought his words were perfect. It made me feel more comfortable, that
Yes.
there was no indication that he was going to pursue an interest in politics and perhaps,
Yeah.
sort of divert things. But I do feel for the man in terms of the grief that he's going through, and he has to handle that publicly, and I think that must be terribly
It's
difficult.
extremely difficult. I mean,
Very
quite what happens behind closed doors
Quite.
for him and for the rest of the family must be very difficult.
And it's immediate, isn't it? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
literally his
Yes,
mother dies
literally, his mother dies and then he can't stop.
No.
His diary's full.
immediately.
Yeah.
Immediately. That must be terribly difficult.
It
really.
must.
It must be.
But I've heard staunch Republicans on the radio just in the last 24 hours saying, actually, I watched his speech and came away thinking, we're in safe hands.
Yeah.
Staunch Republicans
Yes,
saying that.
yes.
Gracious.
He seems to have really hit the right
He
notes.
does, yeah.
I thought it was a beautiful speech. I thought it was really well placed, and he mentioned everybody that he needed to mention.
Yeah.
In the right way, just at the right level.
Just at the right level and with a lot of love.
Yeah.
And that was what was really sort of came through. And of course, we've all pretty much spent some time blubbing at what's happened. And I must admit, the tears came to my eyes at the end of his speech when he said to his mother, well, Phil, thank you.
Yeah.
So,
May flights of angels.
it was that that set me
The other
off.
thing that I thought was really lovely was the shot of him wandering along Buckingham Palace or Windsor, I forget what it was. I think it was Buckingham Palace with Queen Camilla, and some young lady kissed him on the cheek,
Yes.
and then another lady kissed him on the hand, and I thought, and he didn't
back away.
back away. He was in amongst them.
Yeah.
He spent a lot of time walking and talking
He
to
did,
people.
didn't he? He did.
He wanted to see, he was really interested and took his time doing it. And I think that that's a real sign of how he's going to be.
He has been, so far, very impressive and
He really is.
very king-like.
Long apprenticeship, huh?
Yeah, well, very
Very long apprenticeship. Yeah.
Kevin, Claire, thank you both very much indeed. We'll catch up with you in the next hour. Look forward to that. But in the meantime, don't go anywhere. We've got lots more to come in just a moment.